There is another place that is not of Earth and not of our dimension. The working warriors there have a special festival that happens every 7 years and lasts for 40 hours. During this time, the sun disappears due to an eclipse. The workers gather to forge and smelt without sleep, striving to produce as much as possible. The worker warriors had discovered over the centuries that the sleep deprivation and the darkness caused amazing amounts of creative and radical innovation of technology and tactical advancements to be discovered. Yori was unsure of what he was doing but was working harder and more productively than the average worker. Production was all that mattered, and that's what he focused on. Yori found that he was best suited aiding heavy lifting repeating tasks. Rather than building an entire sword, he chose to haul metal to all men making swords. When the final hour was upon the village, Dal came forth and complained to the community that Yori was unfit and incompetent as a worker, and should be punished extremely for not producing a single thing and for making a mess of the village. Yori panicked and began running away from these great warriors. In incredible fear, he began floating off the ground and away from those trying to get their hands and weapons onto his body. As Yori rose high enough that a sword or axe could not strike him, Dal pursued him by using his jetpack. After Yori had reached the height of the tops of the buildings, the men below started screaming in amazement the words Yori Osh as they stopped aggression and began worshipping. Dal maintained his chase after Yori, closing the gap as they traveled into man-made structures in the clouds. Yori was terrified and thought he could not escape Dal, so Yori chose a structure to make a sharp turnaround and then descend in an attempt to fool Dal into chasing higher and higher, as if Yori had accelerated. Dal did not for a moment fall for the trick. Dal immediately turned the corner and chased downward. Dal found Yori hiding and shaking behind the structure. And then, Dal watched Yori digitally evaporate as a cloud of fading tiny blocks of the man he was. Then, in the year 2024, a man on Earth awoke in bed, shocked and enlightened. He was Yori Osh. He felt somehow that he knew he was Yori Osh, but couldn't quite grasp how or why. Then, he returned to sleep. Yori returned to the land he was once from, but many decades had passed and the village bore the marks of time. As Yori entered a tavern, there was a very old man sitting in the corner waiting for him. Yori knew he had to sit with him, drawn by an unspoken understanding. The old man looked at Yori immediately and said, "You are Yori Osh. I am a priest, I am Dal. I was the warrior worker that chased you." Just as Yori begins to evaporate, Dal grabs Yori by the wrist and it stops. Dal explained that the day he chased Yori, Yori did not have a name for himself. The name the warriors called out was Blue Man, up until the moment Yori began floating away. Yori heard the name Yori, but they were actually yelling Blue Man up until he floated, at which time the men called out Yori Osh and surrendered. Dal then explained that Yori Osh was a mythological entity that appears every tens of thousands of years according to lore. Dal continues to explain that the name Yori Osh has many interpretations. Great evader, one who flies, floating warrior, the dreamland person. Dal continues on saying that the day he chased Yori, he felt a crisis when Yori evaporated. He could not come back down and tell the people I caught him, then he disappeared, for he would not be believed. So Dal became a priest-philosopher, he explained. He determined that he lives in an island universe, one that is created by a dreamer in another domain, and that if this idea is true, then the dreamer may return one day. And if that is also true, then he must not appear or behave as the antagonist to the dreamer that he once was. Dal then looks at Yori directly and holds his hands in his and says to Yori, "You are Yori Osh. You are the floating warrior. You created my universe." With that, Yori evaporated once again.